In one sentence, why should people refuse to serve in the Israeli army?
Because there's a genocide and you don't enlist into an army that's committing a genocide.
Hello, and welcome back to A Bit Fruity. Ever since the Nakba in 1948, when Zionists violently expelled Palestinians from their land to create the State of Israel, Israel has had conscription, or required military service, for every Jew who lives there when they turn 18. It's like a military draft, only the draft literally never ends. As of 2022, the minimum service time for men in the Israeli Defense Forces, or the IDF, is 2 years and 8 months. The minimum service for women is 2 years. The IDF plays a huge role in Israeli society. I know Jews I grew up with in New Jersey and New York who, as teenagers, went on Birthright, the fully funded propaganda vacation to Israel meant to spiritually connect the Jewish diaspora to land that Palestinians still cannot return to. And then they literally uprooted their lives in New Jersey or New York and moved to Israel to serve in the military. I know, it's crazy. Refusal to fulfill your military service requirements comes with punishments, namely jail time. Those sentences will range, and the Israeli government has a practice of continuous imprisonment until young people submit to their military service. There's also social consequences. Refusing military service out of protest, especially for the sake of Palestinian life, is deeply unpopular in Israel. A teenager who does this may be cut off from their families, their friends, their support systems, and Israeli society. But as more Israeli teenagers come of age during Israel's ongoing genocide of Palestinians, those are sacrifices that more and more of them are willing to take. Today, in a kind of special episode, we're going to talk to Yona Roseman, a 19-year-old Israeli transgender young woman who has done just that. I first came across Yona in a video shared online last month of her and a group of other young refusers burning their draft papers in a public protest in Tel Aviv. Now she's getting ready for prison. Yona, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
When I posted about that protest where you were burning your draft papers, you reached out to me and you were like, I would love to come on your podcast and talk about this, but also like, I'm going to jail, so we need to do this now.
Yeah.
So I have a few questions before we start anything. First of all, when exactly are you preparing to go to prison? And two, how are you doing right now?
So my conscription date is August 17th. So at the time of recording, in 16 days. And that's the same day I'm going to be imprisoned, likely.
Mm-hmm. How does that work? How does the process of imprisonment work when you refuse?
So we show up at the draft office because not showing up entails harsher punishment. And we declare our refusal, and then a military commander, and preferably the highest ranked military commander, like the commander of the draft office. But she it's a woman.
Feminist win. This war criminal is a woman.
Yeah. So the reason they wanted to be the highest ranked commander is because she can give the maximum length of sentence, which is 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
But after you serve that sentence, you don't get exempted. So then you're called back in, and then you're sentenced again, and that goes on and on until the army gives up or you get an exemption somehow. If you don't show up for a couple of days, but then do show up, because if you want to have more than 3 days in between your imprisonments, then you can do that for a week or two, and but then you get sentenced for additional days. So there's people who've done like 45 days or even 45 days with an additional sentence if they break the conditions again. So yeah, so it's repeated sentences of a month by default.
So do you have any idea, like when it's all said and done, how long you will go to prison for?
No, that's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
I only know that I'll go to my next imprisonment. Since the beginning of the genocide, the longest someone has sat in military prison for refusal was 197 days.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when the army relented.
Just like, we're giving up, like, get out of here.
Yeah. Before October 23, there was an unwritten policy that after between 3 and 4 months, they'd convene a committee that would exempt you. But when the war started, they decided that they're not going to convene that committee anymore, and they kept threatening our refusers that, oh, you're going to sit here for the entire 3 years.
3 years.
And we tested that, and they didn't actually go through with that, but it did take for about half a year.
And then my other question, how are you feeling right now?
Well, I'm pretty nervous. Jail sounds not particularly fun. Also, since I'm trans, I'll be probably put in isolation, and we could talk about it more later, probably. But also outside of jail, the entire last 2 years, but the last couple of weeks in particular have been just very despairing and depressing, and it's really on my mind 24/7. And that's kind of been what has been holding my mood.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Can we jump into some, of your early life? Tell me where you grew up, what your early life was like.
So I grew up in a small town in the north of Israel, the 48 territories. I grew up in what you call a left Zionist family. I was raised on what I would say are like humanistic, universalist values. The word occupation wasn't taboo in my house, but still, very much Zionist Israeli family was very much pro-conscription, and they may want to have peace with Palestinians, but still, like, it's very clear where, like, on which side we're on.
Everything that I've read about the experience of growing up in Israel talks about, being propagandized from a very young age to fear and despise Palestinians. Would you say that that was true for you or the people around you? And like, how much of a role does that propaganda about Palestinians play into people's attitudes towards their Israeli identity and, later joining the military?
So I think since I lived in the north, in the Galilee, which is majority Palestinian, and with the family that I grew up with, I think it was less so that Palestinians or Arabs were demonized and dehumanized, but the question of like the equality was disconnected from the national question. So I was raised on viewing them as equal, but still, the line that I was taught since kindergarten was that we always wanted peace and the Palestinians always rejected peace, and that they want to kill us and we just want to be safe. And that was very much the line in the entire education I've gone through from kindergarten to high school.
Would you say that that is standard for Israelis?
Yeah. I volunteered at a school for like the last year, and I remember when it was Purim, it was the science teacher. It wasn't even like the history teacher. It was the science teacher. It was a third grade class, and she talked to them about the story of Purim and how we beat the Persians and whatever. And then she said, this is like how today we're also gonna beat the Iranians, and no matter how much they want to destroy us, we'll destroy them. Yeah. So like everywhere, it was a very staunchly militaristic and nationalistic line.
Do you think that most Israelis never challenge that as they grow up? Do you think that it's absorbed as, as your children, and you just grow up always kind of feeling like you have to have this military strength towards everyone around you? Yeah,
I think even if you develop more moderate positions in regarding to like conflicts, it still very much comes from like the lens of we're the moral army, where we have to be strong. What for me was like really hard as I was becoming more opposed to whatever thing my country stands for, was not opposing specific policies, but breaking the mindset that what we're doing is fundamentally wrong, and that the army lies, and that like, so for example, I believe like I think the bombings are bad, but I think Hamas terrorists are hiding under like buildings. Those sort of lines, like we're still the most moral army in the world. Like those lines are very much ingrained almost into your mindset, even if you oppose in theory certain policies.
Like no matter how brutal the Israeli regime can be, it's always warranted, it's always justified because what they could do is worse.
Yeah, and also that it's like it has to be a lie that what we're doing is that bad, because it can't be, and because the army says otherwise and the country says otherwise, and it's our army, and it's yeah.
I have so many things that I want to ask you, and so I don't want to get like stuck for too long on any one thing. But while we're here, like right now in Israel, with finally so much of the rest of the world catching up to how brutal and horrible this genocide that they've been committing is, like, what is the feeling of people inside Israel toward the global reaction? Like, do they think that everybody is just misinformed?
At this point, it's become really difficult to deny. And I think what helped for the majority of the genocide was that the media in Israel was very much complacent and just did not show any pictures from Gaza, and called every international outlet or a group who did talk about it falling for Hamas propaganda.
Hamas, exactly. Everyone's Hamas. The A Bit Fruity podcast is Hamas. Yes, I've been told this.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll be arrested for participating in enemy propaganda.
Well, we'll bail you out. We'll bail you out. That's what the Patreon is for.
I mean, what can they do? Send me to jail?
Oh, yeah. The fact that you can have a sense of humor about this is pretty wild.
Anyways, I think, with the pictures that have been coming out of Gaza in recent weeks, it's become hard to deny and to ignore, even for mainstream Israeli media, and that has somewhat broke into like the Israeli consciousness. But a lot of it is still like, it is a catastrophe, but it's Hamas who's responsible for the starvation.
Right.
So it's reluctant. So I think there has been some sort of shift, but the majority of society is still very much for everything that's happening.
I want to talk a little bit about your relationship to your queer identity and your gender, because we're just going to talk about a lot of things today and try to weave them all together in a meaningful way. So talk to me about that. Like, how old were you when you realized you were queer? What was your coming out journey like? Because that is something that, despite a lot of aspects of our lives being very different, that you do have in common with, a lot of the people who listen to this podcast, for example.
Well, I don't know what's considered pretty late, but I realized I was trans around puberty. When I was 13, I think. I didn't grow up knowing a lot of trans people. I knew a couple of trans guys or trans mask people, but no trans girls. So it felt just very distant. So it took me a bit to come to terms with. It took me even longer to come out. So there was like a period of like a year or two where I was already out to my friends and even like in class and in school. But I think like to my parents, I only came out when I was 16.
It's crazy that you think that that's late. Like, I know people who came out in their 60s. You're 19 right now.
Yeah. No, I don't think that's late. It's just it felt like a really long time.
Oh, of course.
The night I came out to my parents was the first time I got drunk. So
good for you.
Yeah.
It happens to the best of us. It does. So we're going to get into some pinkwashing stuff because I really want to talk with you about that. But, one of Israel's top, marketing strategies as a nation state in places like the US is like it's a haven for LGBTQ people. And that's why we must protect it at all costs. And we're going to get into that in a second. But I want to know, like, what was it like growing up as a trans teenager in Israel?
More than anything, it was a bit of a bureaucratic hell.
Say more. Bureaucratic hell.
Yeah, so I came up, I was pretty much only socializing with my friend group and they were fine with it, so that wasn't an issue. I only came out to the rest of my school, who is quite conservative, after October 7th, and by that time my school was evacuated since it's in the far north.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't see my classmates at all, so I kind of dodged a bullet there. So the main headache I had to deal with was like trying to get on hormones. And there's only one gender clinic in the entire country that serves trans kids.
Wow.
And it's in Tel Aviv, which is 2.5 hours away from where I lived. And it was a huge waiting list. And then until they approved me getting on hormones, it was also longer. And then from getting to the national health insurance to recognize it, it's a really long bureaucratic process.
Uh-huh.
Generally, I grew up in quite a liberal environment. I think the most transphobia I faced was only after being public about my leftist activism. 'Cause that's when people start purposefully calling you slurs and misgendering you. And in protests, like people shout at me like, "What are you? Are you a man? Are you a woman?" I had a couple of not very fun interactions with the police when I was arrested. I was arrested a couple of times.
For your activism.
Yes, in protests. Yeah, I was arrested a total of 6 times.
Wow.
During my I was arrested once a year ago and 5 times in the last 3 months. So in that arrest a year ago, the cops beat me up quite bad, and after I was at the police station, I had to go to the hospital. But that was a repression for being an activist, less so than for being transgender. But in the investigation itself, the investigator just refused to gender me correctly, refused to call me by my chosen name, despite me constantly correcting her. And almost every arrest, I'm called like the it, or the half or the they, or even after I changed my name, they search for my like previous name in the document. They like making an issue out of it,
and they use your lack of Israeli nationalism as an excuse to be transphobic, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's because you're against the state and you're like a terrorist or a terrorist supporter, then it's justified, and you can throw all that progressive mask out of the window.
Ugh, God, that is so horrible and also so predictable. Because I don't know, like I'm always preaching about how like all of these systems of human rights or denial of human rights, like they go hand in hand. And so it's like the second that you refuse like nationalism during a genocide, they're like, well, so you don't get your, you don't get your trans rights then.
Yeah. And I think like one of the biggest like cultural shocks for me was for like the first year of the genocide, there almost became an association of queer and trans identity with like the Columbia University protesters. Like I was compared like specifically to like this stereotype of blue-haired kafia wearing protester. And like I don't know, I've been a queer activist for a while, and it's I've always lived here, but that's the association. It's not that it's a particularly bad thing to be compared to, but it's very much like a stereotype now.
I mean, they do that a ton in the US. They're always like, oh, the purple hair protesters at Columbia University. And it's like, well, a lot of times queer people understand how the denial of human rights works and don't want that to happen to other people. Like, I don't know. I guess I wish people understood that better. Like, well, should we talk about pinkwashing?
We could.
I would love to, because I never shut up about this topic, and I feel really lucky to be able to talk to you about it. So one of the arguments that Israel propagandists, I can't even call these people simply pro-Israel anymore, because I think it's like too dignifying of a label for a position that is at this point purely genocidal. One of the arguments that they make, which has been very successful in Western countries like the United States, is that Israel is the only place in the Middle East that values queer rights. It's what we call the pinkwashing of genocide. The idea that colonization and occupation and genocide are excusable if the people committing it are socially liberal or claim to be. I have lost American queer friends of mine to fervent Zionism, and this idea of Israel as a safe haven for queer people played a huge role in their brainwashing. I get comments online that you've probably seen, you, Yona, or anyone listening to this podcast, every single day telling me how I'd be treated as a gay person in Gaza. Go to Gaza, you'll be thrown off a roof. And therefore, I should support Israeli genocide. And so my question for you, like as someone who is trans and who grew up in Israel, I feel like you're in a really unique position when it comes to this issue. Was Israeli society pinkwashed to you growing up? Like, is that an argument and an attitude that exists within Israel, or is it just sort of like a global PR strategy?
When I wasn't targeted or before I was targeted as a left-wing activist, so just as someone growing up in Israel, or even as a queer person growing up, it's not much of a propaganda line. It's not like, oh, Israel is so good for you. Even like the queer discourse that's confined to Zionism and the state of Israel, like recognizes that we have a long way to go. There's violence against queer people, and we don't have a right to marry, and there's a lot of restrictions around adoption, and transitioning has a lot of barriers around it. So both socially and legally, there's an active struggle, even for like queer Jews within Israel. So that's not something that is propagandized by default. But if you're suddenly also against the occupation, or against genocide, and the occupation of Palestinians, then you get called ungrateful for everything that the state provides you with. The line that, oh, you should go to Gaza, it could be thrown off a roof, whatever, it's very common.
Do people say that to you?
Yeah. I've had people say it to me, cops say it to me. It's very common. I think Netanyahu even said that queers for Palestine is like chickens for KFCs.
Netanyahu did say that. And it's like Netanyahu fucking hates queer people of his own volition, not with regard to anything else. Like, that is a far right man. You know,
in a lot of pride parades in recent years, we have had like a block against pinkwashing. It talks about the intersection between the oppression of Palestinians and the oppression of queer people, and how Israel blackmails queer Palestinians.
Do you want to explain that? Because I've seen stories about the blackmailing of queer Palestinians by Israel.
Yeah, there have been testimonies from intelligence officers who have testified that this is something that they've had to do, or were tasked with doing, or did. Essentially, like officers contacting queer Palestinians, telling them that unless they give them intel on wanted people, family members, just people in the street, they'll out them to their environment. In other cases, the granting of asylum has been conditioned on giving intel.
So it's kind of like using queer rights as a thing to like hang over Palestinians' heads, or use against them if they don't cooperate with the Israeli regime.
Yeah. And for example, in 2023, there was a Palestinian from Nablus whose name was Zuhir Khalith, who was executed for spying for Israel after being blackmailed by Israeli intelligence for being queer.
So he was a gay man who was targeted by the Israeli military, blackmailed into spying for the Israeli military, and then killed by his own government for doing that. Jesus.
He said that Shin Bet, the Israeli intelligence force, had an illicit video of him doing something with a male partner.
So, I mean, in some senses, it sounds like the Israeli military doing what they claim will happen to gay people in Gaza, doing that to gay Palestinians.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, they are contributing to the danger that queer Palestinians have to live through. And that's, without even mentioning the fact that Israel has killed more queer Palestinians than any militant group or conservative force by virtue of killing 100,000 Palestinians in Gaza. There isn't a spatial dome that protects specifically queer Palestinians. Israel kills all Palestinians. And it exploits the vulnerability of queer Palestinians, which puts them further in danger.
A quick break from the episode to give a shout out to Incogni for sponsoring this show and making today's episode possible. Incogni, if you're wondering, is a fabulous service that helps you take your personal data off of the online marketplace by reaching out to the hundreds of data brokers that buy and sell your information online all day long and asking them to delete it, which is something that legally you have the right to do, but if you tried to do it, it would very quickly become your full-time job. Incogni is a service that I wish I had when, quick little story time, and I recently told this story at a live show, I was buying my own health insurance for the first time, which as an American freelancer is something that I have to do. And I was scammed by this fake bullshit healthcare scam, which claimed to be name brand health insurance, but was actually a Christian health share ministry, which could deny my requests for coverage if they deemed the cause of illness to be biblically objectionable, like if I was drinking or having gay sex or something. Things that I do. So they wouldn't cover HIV treatments or HIV prevention medications like PrEP, which I take, because they believe that HIV is God's punishment for sin. And they also wouldn't cover a slew of mental health care treatments because they don't believe that that stuff is real. All of which I found out after giving them hundreds of dollars. I'm still bitter about it. Anyways, the point is, I wish that I had Incogni then, so those people never would have had my information and known that I was in the market for healthcare and gone after me and targeted me very successfully. If you want to get your data, your name, your email, your address, your phone number, your employment history out of the hands of data brokers, you should try Incogni. You can take a look and get a big discount off of your annual plan at incogni.com/fruity with the code fruity. That's incogni.com/fruity with the code fruity. Now let's get back to the episode. You mentioned, something about where you'd be placed in prison, in Israeli prison, as a trans person for refusing. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So because I'm trans, well, there isn't a written policy that we know of. There was a transgender refuser in March. Her name is Ella. She's a close friend of mine. She was placed in women's prison, but apart from the morning break and the evening break, which are both an hour, so for 22 hours a day, she was kept in a room alone, in complete solitary.
Jesus.
Which even the regular solitary section in the military prison is in couples. So there's always the person that gets sent to isolation and the person that is accompanying them. So for her, it was just her. And for 15 hours a day, she was awake. All she had to do was sit on her bed. She couldn't even lie on her back or like on the wall or on her bag. Yeah, that's all she was able to do. So we don't know what will happen with me. For the last week of her imprisonment, she was allowed to do like the work you can do, which is seen as like a reward. If you're a good prisoner, then they let you do certain tasks like cleaning or readying the dining room, and also sewing up uniforms and the eye coverings that they put on Palestinian prisoners. Which, if I get told to do that, I'm not going to do it.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
But yeah, they want the prisoners to be productive. So for the last week, she was allowed to do that. And we don't know if it's because of pressure we put on them for them putting a transgender prisoner in isolation, or just because she really was, in their eyes, a good prisoner that was allowed to get that reward. I believe I will also be put in a similar situation, which is scary because I'm a social person and I don't like being alone.
I mean, it just sounds like the Israeli government using queer rights as kind of like a carrot to dangle over your head as long as you fall in line with this genocidal regime. Like, it doesn't sound like a place that authentically values human rights for queer people.
Yeah. For example, I was contacted by the IDF has a gender officer, and the gender officer is in charge of like talking with transgender soldiers and like making sure they are in a unit that is accepting of them and that they get the accommodations that they need.
Mm-hmm.
But then if I go to prison, then I'll be kept in isolation. So it's conditional in a sense.
I guess I want to ask you, as a trans Israeli, because this pinkwashing tactic has been, like I said, it's been so successful, like where I live, and it's seduced people that like I was friends with. What would you say to people, especially people outside of Israel, who have bought into this argument and continue to use it to justify Israel's atrocities?
Well, honestly, the bottom line isn't how Israel treats queer people. It could be the most like safe haven for queer people as it claims to be, and it would still be a country that's committing genocide and killing 100,000 Palestinians. It is important to outline how it lies about that, just like it lies about everything.
How it lies about being a utopia for queer people?
Yeah, just like how it lies about the atrocities it commits in Gaza and how it lies about its treatment of Palestinians within Israel. It constantly lies, and it's important to point out that this is also a lie and a propaganda, but the bottom line is that it doesn't matter. There is no amount of progressivism a country can achieve that will permit it to commit genocide and mass starvation, and that's the bottom line.
I want to talk a little bit about your decision to refuse service and about kind of what happens when you do. Could you talk to me a little bit about the movement to, they call it conscientious objectors or refuseniks? There's a historical precedent for this movement. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So as long as there has been conscription there has been refuseniks.
Refuseniks is the name that they give to people who refuse service.
It's sort of a nickname that we've adopted. It has other connotations with Jews from USSR. But yeah, there have been people who refused mandatory service for as long as there has been conscription. In your intro, when you mentioned that Israel has been employing conscription since 1948, I was actually about to say that even before the foundation of Israel, back in 1947, the many Zionist militias would go to the camps of displaced Holocaust survivors and conscript Jews from there. There was even a Yiddish play made about it that is supposed to be like an indictment against a fictional draft avoider. It's insane how for how long Israel has employed it, and we have testimonies and letters even from 1948 of people who refused the military service. And in the last couple of decades, it has taken form in two major ways. The first one is reservist refusers, people who did do army service but then refused the reserve cause during specific wars that they were in opposition to. This started around the first war in Lebanon back in the 1980s.
Is that because, so my understanding is that you get drafted initially to do your IDF service and then like afterwards they put you in the reserves?
Yes. And essentially you have to, every couple of years, you have to do training. And when there's a war or another incident, then they send out a bunch of reserve orders to people who are listed as active reservists.
And you stay on that list of people in the reserves until you're 40?
Yeah, I think 40 or 45 even. I'm not sure exactly what's the cutoff. But yeah, for decades.
Mm-hmm.
Around then, there were people who refused the reserve services, but this was more so like conditional refusal. They refused to a specific war or to serve in the occupied territories, that sort of stuff. Later, I think around the 90s, there started things called like מכתבי שמיניסטים, which is like letters of 12th graders, which is just generations of 12th graders who would together sign a letter refusals, and this is something that is still being done. Back in the early 2000s, there was the biggest letter in history. I think it was signed by around 350 people. This was during the second Intifada. And 5 of them were sentenced not just to military jail, but then they were tried in civilian court and sent to civilian jail as well. And they served a total of 2 years, of 2 full years in prison. And that was like a really big controversy around then, because they actually like went on trial and challenged the idea of conscription. And specifically, I'm a member of a group called Mesavot.
Mm-hmm.
Mesavot means we refuse in the female form in Hebrew. It was founded a decade ago in 2016. It's sort of a network of refusers throughout the years. We not just are active around the time of our refusal, but also for refusers in following years and before. And I, for example, have been active in Mesavot for around 2 years.
Before you could ever even refuse, you weren't old enough. You were a minor.
Exactly. Yeah, so and it's a group that it gives us a platform and like a group to be active with, and we organize protests, and we organize specifically like protests on the day of the refusal of different refusals. For example, yesterday there were 2 of my friends, Ayana and Yuval, went to jail for refusing, and we went to the draft office with them and protested there. And we also protested in front of the military jail when the refusers are in jail. And it gives us legal support and media support and parental support. So it's a really nice. And most importantly, it gives us like a community. Like refusing is an act that is really just so out of the consensus in Israeli society that it really helps to not be alone in it, and that's the biggest advantage. So that's my political home, essentially.
Can I ask, how old were you when you learned about the movement to refuse military service, and how did you learn about it? Because I would imagine that officials in Israel try to keep a cap on how people find out about that kind of thing.
Yeah, so for a while I knew I didn't want to serve, but it didn't really look like an option. I really didn't know about it. And then I went to this Israeli-Palestinian summer camp, and the assistant guide was a former refuser. And at some point she talked about her journey of refusing, and was only then that that concept was really like demystified for me. Before then, I already started finding out about it because I was going to protests against occupation and against apartheid, and it was there that I met other people my age who were also activists, and they were already involved in those sort of circles. But it was only then that I properly like heard about it, and it was after that that I joined Mesabot myself, and around a month later there was a big event of like us releasing another like refusal letter that was signed by 250 teenagers. And I remember when I was active there and I actually talking to people who have went through it and saying that there's a lot of fear mongering around not serving. Like there's like they tell you like you won't be able to find a job and you won't be able to get housing and a lot of that stuff. And I think just seeing that people continued with their life and that they weren't completely ostracized really helped dispel the fear around it for me. And I think being active in it and like there's something about like taking my freedom into my own hand and saying no, even at the cost of my physical freedom, that was very liberating. And it was that feeling that convinced me that this was something I wanted to do myself and that this was a price I was willing to pay.
What is the attitude of young Israelis, generally speaking, towards the IDF? Like, do most young people want to serve out of patriotism? Do people not want to serve, but they fear the repercussions, so they do it anyway?
I think most people want to serve. Young Israelis are very much captured by the nationalistic narrative that everyone has to serve and that it's a good thing and then the army makes an active effort to encourage teenagers to enlist. So for example, when I was in high school, we were sent to like a military camp for a week where we wore uniform and held weapons and had our own like miniature military training to make it seem like fun and like this is something that we would want to do. And there's in a lot of schools, including mine, there are like teacher officers who are there to help you with your studies, but then also to check you up on like how you're doing with the different military orders and if there's specific roles that you want to be in and if you got like calls to try to get into specific units or walls. And they often talk about how if you go to intelligence you can then find a job in high tech, and it's seen as a very like personally uplifting move to enlist and to do like meaningful service.
How old are you and how old are Israelis when they start kind of like really pushing that onto you as like an integral part of Israeli life?
So your first call to the draft office is in 11th grade. For me, it was just before I turned 17. It's between 16 and 17 that you go to the draft office and go through different like health checkups and then interview and they ask you which roles you want to do. And from there, there's a consistent journey of like, you get letters inviting you to go to the Air Force trial or to like the elite combat units trial or intelligence trial, etc. It's funny, I my refusal is in 16 days and I still get messages telling me to go to some computer unit asking me to like do specific tests so I could go there. And I don't think they got the memo that I'm not interested.
Yeah, I don't think so. They're not listening to A Bit Fruity.
No. Yeah, for a while I got a lot of calls from the Air Force and I'm like, I'm not interested. And they really didn't let go. And for a lot of schools, specifically in less fortunate like socioeconomic backgrounds, like the school I went to, the army encourages a thing where they give the first order to the military for the entire like grade at the same day. So you go with your entire school instead of because a lot of the time, it's not that people don't want to serve, but they're too lazy to show up. The 16-year-olds who don't want to take a bus at 6 a.m. to a different city to a random draft office. So they encourage the school to send all of the grades together as like a field trip to the to the draft office, which was an interesting experience for me, not being out yet to my school, but the army knowing I'm trans. So then they were like, well, they want to go to the boys' interview or to the girls' interview, and they were on different floors of the building. It was a whole thing.
I mean, look, being from the United States, we are not at all free of our own awful military industrial complex, predatory practices on teenagers, especially from less fortunate socioeconomic backgrounds. we are not exempt from that critique here at all. But it does seem like a particularly unique level of fucked up that they require every child to engage on this level and like convince you that like your upwards mobility in society will be dependent on how well you perform your military service like as children. Like that I mean, not to sound crass, but that seems like very fucked up.
Yeah, and then you have teenagers, 18-year-old teenagers signing not just on the 3-year conscription, but on the academic programs in the army that then force you to to do additional years of professional service after your mandatory service. And yeah, so I have friends who are from my grade who have signed a contract of like 9 years with the army, which is insane. And this is something that they already had to aim for before they were even adults. It's insane. It's batshit.
It is batshit. I would like to take a quick break from the show to thank RocketMoney for sponsoring today's episode and making it possible. We are in the thick of summer, and summer for me is the time that I find it's easiest to spend money, honestly. It's warm out, concerts are happening, sweet cold little $6 treats are constantly making themselves available to me. People in New York joke that it's impossible to leave your house without spending money. And for me, it's the time of the year that I want to indulge in a sweet little treat. I'm a proud participant in the economy of sweet treats, but I want to be smart about spending. And for me, leaning into the sweet treat economy means cutting back elsewhere. One great place to do that is by cutting out expenses that I am paying for in the background and may have forgotten about or don't need anymore. That is where RocketMoney comes in. RocketMoney is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and lowers your bills to help you grow your savings. The app analyzes all of your bills and gives you a really well-organized, easy-to-understand dashboard that shows you all of your spending and subscriptions in one place, and helps you cancel the ones you don't need anymore with just a few clicks. RocketMoney has over 5 million users and has saved them a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions. And it can save you up to $740 a year when you use all of the app's features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions, reach your financial goals faster, and join me in leaning into the sweet treat economy. You can start right now at rocketmoney.com/fruity. That is rocketmoney.com/fruity. Thank you so much to RocketMoney. And now let's get back to the episode. A lot of people around the world who are looking at this genocide Israel is committing will say, and they do say online, there's no way I would ever join the Israeli military. There's no way I would participate in that. And obviously, and I think you'd agree with this, they're correct. It's not a morally complicated decision to make. As you've said, in another interview that I watched with you, if a military is committing a genocide, you don't enlist in that military. At the same time, though, I want to paint a picture for people of what it means, socially and legally, which we've talked about the legal aspect a little bit, to refuse service in a society that shuns people who make that decision. Could you talk to me about, how refusers are treated? What was the reaction from your family, your friends, etc.?
So there's a lot of factors that play into it. Military service is seen by like mainstream society as the ticket and gateway into Israeli citizenship. So if you don't serve, then you're not a real participant of society, and your political opinions matter less, and you shouldn't be prioritized in academy or healthcare services or welfare or whatever. If you haven't served in the military, then you haven't done your duty, and it's only after you do your duty that you can demand your rights. Essentially, is a common talking point. And there are certain demographics who don't get conscripted for one reason or another, and there's a lot of antagonism against them for that because they're seen as not giving their part.
So I mean, it almost sounds like they kind of I don't know, again with the dangling carrot metaphor, but it's like you earn your full participation in Israeli society through participating in the enforcement of Israeli violence. Yeah,
and in a lot of ways, serving in the military is that gateway into it is an inherent part of Israeli nationalism. So it's Israeli identity is in large part made up by it. So not serving in the army is a rejection of Israeli identity in at least some ways. I've had classmates who cut contact with me over my decision to refuse. A lot of like my friends these days are essentially made up of the people who are with me in my activism. So for them, obviously, it's not something that they have to contend with. It's a good thing. For my family, it was difficult. I've had my parents tell me pretty difficult things over the years since I decided to do it. But I think they still love me as their child and want me to feel like they're behind me even if they don't support my actions. So it's gotten better, but they have not been particularly supportive of my decision. But I think I do think it's important to outline that it really does not, at least in my eyes, it does not matter how difficult that decision or like how much difficulties it entails, because it's the decision itself is very trivial, and there's a reason I insist on saying that when people ask me what are the consequences, because I think it's interesting to talk about the consequences. Obviously, it's not nothing that there's social ostracization and that I'm going to jail or whatever, but there's a genocide, and it doesn't matter like what price there is to pay when the other option is to serve in an army that's committing genocide. That's something that I'm very adamant about.
So Israel will often brand itself, the only democracy in the Middle East, which is why people in the United States should unconditionally support it. Like pinkwashing, this is a fallacy in my eyes. Israel isn't a full democracy. It has occupied Palestinian land and turned Palestinians into second-class citizens, subject to Israeli control, but with no voting power. So there's that. But also, you're about to go to jail for refusing to join Israel's genocidal military regime. To me, that doesn't feel like the working of a functioning democracy. And so I guess my question for you is like, do you think Israel is democratic?
No.
Okay.
I mean, it's very simple. I mean, when a country has millions of subjects that are deprived of voting rights and that live under a different legal system, then it's not a democracy. But it goes further than that. The entirety of like the Israeli legal system is built to enshrine the supremacy of Jews over Palestinians, and it's not just in the West Bank or just in Gaza. It's throughout the entire, it's throughout all of Palestine, from the river to the sea. There's really one regime there, and that's its ultimate goal. And this is true for Palestinians who do hold Israeli citizenship as well. And obviously, when a state is committing genocide and is acting in such an immoral and evil, it's a way, then to uphold that system, it needs to continuously employ undemocratic measures, and it needs to suppress dissent and outlaw dissent and jail people and falsely accuse them of being terrorists. And it's unavoidable when this is the sort of system it's trying to uphold. So yeah, there's nothing democratic about it.
I find it so valuable to ask you these things because it's like these are the things that like Americans around me and around the communities that I grew up in as like an American Jew, these are the talking points they repeat over and over and over again. It's all like, well, we have to unconditionally support Israeli genocide. Of course, they don't call it genocide, but they'll say that we have to support it because Israel's democracy, and you're a queer person. Imagine the Middle East without Israel, whatever. And it's like, I don't know. I feel like all of these arguments are just so paper thin, especially once you talk to someone who's actually living through these like this apparent utopian liberal society that people who don't live there claim it to be.
I think there's such a dissonance from that vision once you have like a single conversation with the Palestinian that's living under that system. It's not bridgeable. That entire discourse is just layers upon layers of propaganda, and it's like if you just look at the reality in its eyes, there's no way you can actually believe it.
As an Israeli 19-year-old, you have made the most ethical decision available to you. I keep saying that you're 19 because I just cannot believe you're so young. And I also hate not being the youngest person in a conversation anymore. It is what it is. I'm making peace.
Mhm.
But you've made the most ethical decision available to you. And obviously you're going to prison for it. For the rest of us, who are privileged enough to not be in that position, what do you want people listening to do to continue to oppose genocide?
Well, I think the bottom line of my refusal is that no weapons, no aid, no resources, no cooperation should be done with a state that's committing genocide. And of course, that's not to say that before October 7th, Israel was a moral state that, was suddenly corrupted. Obviously, it's a state that's upholding apartheid system and that's been committing ethnic cleansing for 77 years. But really, the reality as it exists today makes the question of what needs to be done very simple. And is that we need to employ every tool that we have to withhold as much help as we can from that country to continue advancing its goals. And for me, it's withholding myself as a resource for the continuation of the genocide. And for people living abroad, it's putting pressure on governments, institutions, businesses to cut all ties and aid with the state of Israel and to take matters into their own hands and block the flow of weapons into the state of Israel. And it's not an easy task. I don't want to act like it is, but it's very much what needs to be done. And it's what I'd encourage everyone to do, is to find a group that's their line, that they want to exert as much pressure as possible and organize with them and do it, because that's what needs to be done.
Do you have any plans for when you get out of prison?
It's a good question. Want to be a journalist. I'm a writer already. I write an article every couple of months, but I want to do it more. I don't know. There's something about this period that I'm at that makes things more simple, because it's almost like I don't need to think about, to deeply think about what I need to do, because it's very clear that what I need to do is to refuse my military service, and then I'll be in jail. In jail, there's also not much more I could do. After that, I want to continue doing what I can. Hopefully, I live in some illusion that maybe by the time we get out, I won't be genocide anymore. And then I'll continue doing what needs to be done against the rest of the atrocities that my country commits. But I don't know. I want to continue doing what I can, maybe studying at some point.
Well, if you want to come back on the A Bit Fruity podcast after you're out of prison, I'll be more than happy to welcome you back, Yona.
Yeah, that's a life goal for sure. We can do
permanent co-host once you've once you're out of Israeli prison.
We can also do you can check up on me in between imprisonments if you want.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Wait, let's do that. Let me know in the comments. I mean, I actually kind of think that I've already decided I want to do that. Would be great to.
Yeah, we can also bring my partner who's refusing in October.
Oh, wait, what? Your partner is also refusing?
Yeah. So, it's a bit funny to bring it up an hour into the recording, I suppose. Yeah, I live with my partner. Their conscription date is in October, and he's also going to declare his refusal. And she's sitting right next to me, actually, and giving me faces. So,
hi, partner.
Hi. The name is Danielle. Hello.
Hi, Danielle. Well, maybe we're gonna have to do this with you in October.
I would love that. I would absolutely love that.
Well, I can't say enough how, I know you're not doing this for the admiration of anybody. I know you're doing it because it's the right thing to do. But, I feel really privileged to have not had to make a decision like the one that you're both making, I've just learned. And I know that it's going to mean a lot for people to hear all of this from you. So thank you so much for talking to me today. I know this is 20% more earnest than most of my episodes, but man, this shit is so serious. It's hard to, pepper in the jokes as I usually do, but I really, really appreciate both of you. And I really appreciate getting to talk to you, Yona. Hearts.
Thank you for having me. It was really nice talking to you. I'll see you after I go to jail, I suppose.
Where can people find you online before and after your imprisonment? That is something that I've never said in the outros to these episodes. It's like, where can people find you online after you get out of jail?
I post on Twitter. I'll quit eventually because it's owned by a neo-Nazi, but for now I post on Twitter. It's at Your Nationalist. Yeah, and also you can follow Mesavot on all socials, and they post updates for me and for my friends who also go to jail. And once I do go to jail, you could send me letters, which I would really appreciate because I'll have a lot of time in isolation. So,
do you want to send me? You'll text me how people can send you letters.
Yeah, but it's not like physical letters. There's gonna be a Google Forms in Mesavot's link tree, and you can write there, and you can write to the other people who are also in jail. I would really appreciate it because I'll have a lot of free hours in isolation that I'll have to spend somehow.
Well, I think you're going to be getting a lot of letters from A Bit Fruity listeners. I will link all of those, the Twitter links, the Messar Vote links, in the episode description. Thank you. If you have listened this far, I love you so much. This was a really important episode to me. I know topic-wise, this podcast gets all over the place. Sometimes we're talking about Jojo Siwa. Sometimes we're talking about genocide. But, you know, we all have ranges of interest, and this is my podcast, so these are mine. I love you so much, and until next time, stay fruity.